Today's lecture is on Nouvelle Vague or French New Wave. This is a European film movement which happened after the war in the 1950s. If we remember that just after the war there had been another major film movement in Europe, that is the Italian Neorealism. So Italian Neorealism and French New Wave, this will be two important templates of new cinemas all over the world in the coming decades, and this template still is functional. It makes a very good introduction if we very loosely compare these two movements. Then we will know about certain features which distincts two movements which otherwise might look similar. For example, if we look at it at surface, then it will appear that both the movements, they use real location shooting, natural light conditions, shooting in natural light conditions, using in certain cases using direct sound, so on and so forth. And we also see that in both the film movements there will be a large outdoor shooting on the urban outdoors, shooting on stage, so on and so forth. But the similarities, they almost end there. If we go to the distinctions, the distinct features of these two movements, then we will have to consider the role of the director, which will be very important in the French New Wave. In case of Italian Neorealism, there was a overarching umbrella aesthetic to which all the director must subsume himself or herself under which. For example, if Roberto Rossellini makes an Italian Neorealist film or Vittorio De Sica makes an Italian Neorealist film, then both of their films, they must look similar, because though they are different directors altogether, they are making a film which falls under a overarching aesthetics, an overarching aesthetical paradigm. But in case of French New Wave, it will be completely other. So in case of French New Wave, if you recall who are the major French New Wave filmmakers like Jean-Luc Godard, filmmakers like François Truffaut, Claude Chabrol, Eric Rohmer, Jacques Rivette, Alain Resnais, Agnes Varda, Chris Marker, so on and so forth. In case of the French New Wave filmmakers, each filmmaker must have their own distinct style. So a Jean-Luc Godard film should not look like a François Truffaut film. The worldview of a Alain Resnais film should not be like that of a Jacques Rivette film. So in case of French New Wave, one of the most important feature would be the distinct personality of the director as it is shown on the screen. We can divide our lectures into three broad sections. Firstly, we will talk about the idea of politique des auteurs or the idea of cinematic authorship, and then we will talk about cahiers du cinéma and film criticism, and then we will briefly discuss two major French New Wave films. If you think of the idea of authorship, one of the most influential claims made by the French New Wave filmmakers was that the director is the main expressive artist behind the film. Now, the importance of the director was actually paramount before the French New Wave said that the director is the only important, almost the singular important existence behind the camera. The importance of the director was there. But the French New Wave filmmakers, before they were filmmakers, a big section of these filmmakers, they were critics, and they they wrote their criticism in a journal, in a renowned journal called Cahiers du Cinéma, which was edited by André Bazin, a mentor-like figure behind many of the French New Wave directors. So when these filmmakers, they were writing about cinema, they were making film criticism, they said that the director of the film is not only the most important man behind this film, but he is also the sole expressive individual behind the film. In other words, cinema is the medium of expression of a single individual, that is, the director. Just like painting, in case of a painting, the painting or the canvas is the medium through which the painter expresses himself, or the poem is a medium through which the poet expresses himself. Similarly, in case of cinema, the film is the text through which a director is expressing his or her own worldviews. Now, this idea that cinema is the expressive medium and the director is the expressive individual artist behind the medium might be taken for granted today, might be thought of as something obvious and natural today. But we should remember that during those days, that is during the latter half of the 1950s, this was a tall claim to make to many, even many serious film lovers, because cinema at that time was largely dominated by the Hollywood industrial production and the Hollywood industrial mode of filmmaking, where the director is often one of the many salaried personnel under a studio. So, if the case is like this, that in classical Hollywood cinema, if a studio decides to make a film and the studio commissions a screenplay writer to write the screenplay of the film, and studio decides on the cast and crew and other things, they might actually decide who will direct the film much after the initial pre-production is done. So many critics who'd argue against the Kayadu cinema film critics who were claiming that the directors they were the director is the creative expressive individual artist behind the screen. So the opponent would argue that cinema is largely an industrial and collective medium. So it cannot be compared to that of a painting or that of a poem, so on and so forth, or to that of an essayist as such, so on and so forth. That cannot be compared, because the other art medium like poetry, painting, etc., they don't involve a large number of individuals. Cinema not only involves large number of individuals, but in cinema there are many decision makers: the producer, the lead character artist, the cinematographer, and the director is one among them. So many people said that it is difficult to claim that the director is the expressive individual behind the screen. Now, the young Kayedu cinema critics, comprising Godard, Truffaut, Rivet, Chavrol, Romer, Eric Romer, so on and so forth, they said that they will prove that even in classical Hollywood cinema, where the director was one of the many salaried personnel, even there the director has used films or cinema as one of their expressive medium, and to do so they opted for a well thought out and rather easy formula. They said that the specificity of cinematic language lies in mise-en-scène, not in characterization. For example, not in the story, not in the characters, not in lighting, so on and so forth. They said that specificity lies in the overall arrangement of a scene, that is the mise-en-scène. In case of mise-en-scène, cinema is unique, unlike other arts. Therefore, he says that. Therefore, they said that who commanded over the mise-en-scène? It's the director, and that's true even in case of Hollywood. These three divisions: the pre-production, production and the post production, and if the director is in command during the production phase, then during the production phase the director is in command over the mise en scene. So mise en scene is the in mise en scene lies the artistic specificity and linguistic specificity of cinema. Therefore, they said that through the mise en scene, the directors mainly expresses themselves. And the Kaidu cinema critics, they brought out an easy way out to understand this. They used to repeatedly view films of a filmmaker and try to find out either a motif or a device which is unique to that of to that filmmaker. For example, in case of Hitchcock, there is a tracking shot. In case of John Ford, there is the landscape scenes. So they will say that these devices are very specific to these directors, and these directors, they can use these devices very uniquely. Then they will try to understand, they will go back to the films, and then they will try to understand that what these devices, for example the tracking shot or the close up or the landscape shot, what do they mean to the specific director. And in this way they will start understanding the meaning of this cinematic devices, and through this meaning of the cinematic devices they will create a worldview of the director, of the great director, or as they said, of the auteur. So auteur is a French term which means mainly a great author, which then got incorporated into the vocabulary of film culture. In this way, the Kaidu cinema critics, they would repeatedly watch their favorite filmmakers' films, and they will try to understand the worldview of this filmmaker by reading those films, and also try to find out a distinct personality of the filmmakers by understanding the devices he uses. So when the Kaidu cinema critics, they were trying to read other films, mainly films of Hollywood, they were trying to understand two things. One, the personal style of the filmmaker, and two, the worldview of the filmmaker. Much before, in 1947, Alexander Astruk, a noted filmmaker, film theorist at that time, he wrote a very short piece of essay called The Birth of a New Avant-Garde, La Camera Stylo. La Camera Stylo is a French term. It means the camera pen. Here, Alexander Astruk is saying that after the wars and after the advent of the talkie, there is now the time for a new kind of avant-garde, where the earlier avant-garde, the older avant-garde belongs to the silent era, that is the expressionist cinema, the Soviet constructivist cinema, the French impressionist cinema, so on and so forth. But now is the time when a new kind of avant-garde is coming up, a new kind of art cinema, as later it will be described as, which is the cinema of the director author. Here he uses the metaphor of camera stylo or the camera pen. Now this metaphor has many implications. For example, the pen is something very cheap, and later we'll see the French New Wave filmmakers, they will actually stress on low budget or almost minimal budget filmmaking. So to them, as in Astruk's essay, filmmaking must become cheaper. The filmmaker must find certain means so that the cost of the film doesn't increase, and he doesn't have to, he need not be dependent on larger economic institutions like that of the studio. French New Wave would be emblematic of a peculiar situation, of a very ambivalent engagement with American cinema as such, because in Paris during the times of occupation, American cinema was not allowed to be exhibited. They had a kind of blockade on American cinema, and just after the war, the American cinemas, they were released into the French New Wave scene. And this will be very evident if you see Jean-Luc Godard's first film, Breathless. So Jean-Luc Godard's first film, Breathless, along with Alain René's Hiroshima Mon Amour and François Truffaut's 400 Blows, they are considered to be the starting point, the beginning point of French New Wave. And in Jean-Luc Godard's Breathless, we see a strange situation. Two characters who are in love with each other, that is Michel Poycar, played by Jean-Paul Belmondo, and Patricia, played by Jean Seberg. So while Patricia is a girl who looks very realistic, an American girl who is in love with French high culture, on the other hand, we see Michel Poycar, who looks like as if he is a character who has come down from cinema, who is a French conman, a French gangster, who is in love with American mass culture. So, one American in love with French culture and a French gangster who is in love with American mass culture. So, in this film, Jean-Luc Godard tries to make a tribute to the smaller studios. The film is starts with a label, a tribute to Monogram Studios. The Jean-Luc Godard pays a tribute to the smaller studios who survived against the competition of bigger studios in Hollywood.
Où on va?
N'importe où, à Saint-Michel.
On couche ensemble ce soir?
Je ne sais pas.
Pourquoi? Pas bien avec moi?
And we see that through very meager means, through in the lack of trolley, he used a perambulator and he used natural lights or minimal lights. Jean-Luc Godard starts telling a love story which refers to the gangster genre and the film noir genre, and through which, instead of giving primacy to telling the story, Jean-Luc Godard, through scenes after scenes, is actually expressing his ideas. Ideas regarding culture, ideas regarding cinema, ideas regarding politics, ideas regarding French society, idea regarding the relationship between the French and the American culture, so on and so forth. So the little film, as such, the little story, it became merely an excuse through which the director can contemplate on certain ideas. So in this film, we see two distinct things. One, Jean-Luc Godard has a distinct style and distinct way of dealing things which are cinematic. And two, we also have a distinct idea of what the filmmaker is thinking about. Like this personal kind of cinema, we also see in Francois Truffaut's first full-length feature film, another example of another kind of personal cinema, which is also very rare in history of cinema. That is the idea of a autobiographical film. Because cinema can't use first person like in novel, so an autobiography is seldom attempted in cinema. Later we will have two major examples like that of Hrithik Ghatak's Komal Gandhar and Andrei Tarkovsky's Mirror. But one of the beginners of this kind of idea that cinema can be also be turned into autography is that of 400 Blows. But we will see how in 400 Blows, Francois Truffaut, while depicting the few days of a little kid of Antoine Donail, who is aged 11 or 12, how Francois Truffaut is actually making a comment, a directorial comment on French society. I'll be particularly speaking of one single scene. That is in the first scene. In the first scene, we see a classroom where there are lots and lots of boisterous children, and there is a very dominating class teacher. So the class teacher is trying to bring the students into order, and the students are unruly, they are actually wayward, and they are making a hell of a noise out there. So while this conflict between the teacher and student goes on, and the teacher goes on to punish, namely Antoine Donail, who is the lead character of the film, then at the end of the sequence, we see the teacher throwing its hands out and say, what will happen to to this generation after 10 years.
Tiens, l'imbécile, qui est sifflé? Ah, je vous préviens, je vais être injuste. Si le coupable ne se dénonce pas, c'est le voisin qui prendra, n'est-ce pas, Simoneau?
Mais je vous jure, monsieur,
Oh!
c'est pas moi, monsieur.
Des lâches, en plus. Ah, quelle année, quelle classe. Ah, j'en ai connu des crétins. Mais au moins, ils étaient discrets. Se cachaient. Ils restaient dans leur coin. Et vous? Vous pensez avoir effacé? Non, vous avez sali, mon ami. Allez à votre place copier les récitations. Tant pis pour vous, vos parents paieront. Ah, elle va être un peu belle, la France, dans 10 ans.
À quoi tout le monde pose de l'argent à ses parents? Ouais, mais c'est difficile quand même. Même Morissa, je te parie. Eh, Morissa, viens voir. T'as un renseignement à te demander.
Now, Truffaut was actually becoming very prophetic because within 10 years, this film was being shot in 1958. Within 10 years, that is in May 1968, this generation, when they will grow up, they will take Paris to the streets to in the famous May 1968 revolt, May 1968 revolution, as many of them says. But what is important for us is not the prophecy, but the cut which ends this sequence. When this sequence ends, when the teacher makes this announcement that what will this generation do after 10 years, immediately we have a cut and we have a shot outside the school and showing a facade in front of the school, and there it is written liberty, equality, fraternity. So we know liberty, equality, fraternity, they are French slogans, slogans which symbolizes the French Revolution. So in a way, in the previous scene, Truffaut had already established that even the classroom situation or even the conditions of childhood is that of oppression and a kind of revolt against the oppression. The relationship between the younger children and the older adults is that of violence and power, and that of oppression, punishment, and rebellion. Truffaut harks back to the promises of liberty, equality, and fraternity during the French New Wave, thus but through it making a comment on the French society in 1958.
Plus qu'une minute. Silence! Nous allons ramasser dans 30 secondes. Silence, silence.
So this is how, through a cut and through what the cut joins before the cut and after the cut, what comes after the cut and what went before the cut, the director makes a sort of comment on the society. He uses his medium as a kind of expressive language. So at the end of the lecture, I will request you to go back to the French New Wave films made by Alain Resnais, Jean-Luc Godard or François Truffaut, and see how the films of each director has a distinctive style of their own. Not only they have a distinctive style, but they have also certain consistent things to speak about. Also look how these films are drawing attention to themselves as constructions instead of being a window to the world. They are not saying that you are looking at reality through the frame, a reality out there. They are saying that you are looking at a material construction. It's a material construction that is a linguistic text through which the director is trying to express himself. So go back to the New Wave films and try to understand what we have said in this lecture, how these films are distinct from other film movements and so on and so forth. And thus we come to the end of this lecture.